and narration of events. And at the same time, which also gathered its material largely from personal interviews, social science research, multiple and presented multiple characters and voices on stage by small changes and shifts in shape and costumes. And the third category followed exactly the framework of conventional theater, traditional theater format of storytelling, with a beginning, the breach, and a conclusion, beginning the crisis and the end pattern of conventional theater, and which definitely fulfilled the desire of the spectators, exactly the way how contemporary theater, conventional theater, fulfilled the desire of the spectators. This third category of storytelling by a narrator within the framework of conventional theater has no actual difference, and I don't consider them as a part of the solo performance we try to define at the moment. And I have mentioned the book, the collected, edited, anthology of performance texts by Joe Bonney, and the title is the book is titled as "Extreme Exposures." There is a very significant, meaning behind the adaptation of the title "Extreme Exposures," uh, because the voices portrayed, illustrated in solo performances to a large extent were characterized by a very powerful sense of identity politics, a very sense of politics of difference, and a very powerful undercurrent of protest, politically loaded theater within the framework of solo performance. That's why the voices are extremely voiced. That is, the exposure is extreme. And the exponents of this particular performance form, solo performance, are Spalding Gray, Andy Kaufman, Anna Devia Smith, Maya Krishnarao, Karen Finley, Holly Hughes, Tim Miller, Rani Murthy, Robbie McCulley, and all. And solo performances become a center of attention by art critics and institutions of art, with the denial of fund in 1990s by the National Endowment of the Arts of the United States for four artists: Holly Hughes, Karen Finley, Tim Miller, and Robbie McCauley, because most of these people uh, told the stories of gay and lesbian, lives. And Holly Hughes and Karen Finley were obsessed with, they were particularly interested in portraying the lives of gay and lesbian characters. Because of the portrayal of gay and lesbian characters, the government, the National Endowment of Art, refused to fund the projects submitted by these people. And these performers were known as NEA4 for many years. And there are quite a number of reasons behind the rise of solo performance in 20th century. There are economic reasons behind the rise of this genre of performance art. The lack of availability of entertainment, mainstream theater and performance venues, and the lack of capital because of the crisis of economy in the last 20 years in the Western economic sector. And the even the availability of off Broadway and off of Broadway finally restricted the solo performers and performance artists and enthusiasts and spectators to small clubs and small underground gathering places, because of the laxity of unavailability of public venues and performance halls. Second is a cultural reason. Mainstream theater, especially the mainstream conventional theater in times of modernism and the 20th century, paved the way for a sort of a cultural harmonization and including political theater. All sorts of modern theater deleted specifically, deliberately, the voices of the marginalized, especially the sexual minorities, uh, political minorities, racial and ethnic minorities, and religious minorities, and embraced a sort of a universalization of the hegemonic life in Europe and United States. And this cultural context of the cultural hegemony and homogenization is treated by exponents of identity politics, of sexual minorities, racial and ethnic minorities, linguistic minorities, religious minorities, and the politics of defense is envisaged as a part of the process of asserting the identity of marginal categories. And radical feminism located the first instance of citing the difference, but the politics of difference, with Carolee Schneemann, a renowned American performer who performed a work known as Interior Scroll, in which she read out her biographical details from a paper scroll taken out of her vagina. And that gradually, this practice gradually paved the way for, if you search Google the Carolee Schneemann, you will get images of this particular performance. LGBTQ and racial and ethnic minorities also asserted their identity and identity politics in the through solo performance performances in a wide variety of ways. And the third important reason is a political one. Uh, there was a Great Depression in political theater in the 1960s and 70s because of the large-scale mobilization of political theater and political movements in many countries. And this political theater is directed both to a public political theatrical arena. At the same time, the political theater in solo performance targeted the theatrical institutions existed within the spectrum of the hegemony of modern theater. And this is part and parcel of the spirit of the modernist rebellion against institutionalized hegemonic practices uh, of art, theater, and literary institutions. For instance, Marcel Duchamp's work, Fountain in French and Urinal in English, is depicted the urinal within the framework of on the walls of an art gallery, and thereby dismantling the authority of art institutions and art galleries and the art making process and the ideology of art making institutions. Solo performance art also wanted to illustrate the same political procedure through political activities by dismantling the hegemony and authority of theater institutions in various parts of the world. And the fourth is a community reason. Uh, Large-scale mainstream entertainment theaters have delineated, isolated small communities, especially minorities, and minority communities and racial and ethnic minorities were in search of an experimental performance mode, and they finally found solo performance art as a very effective part of their community practices for self-reflection and community action. And solo performance art definitely opened the way for the possibility of all visual art forms, including cinema, television, graphic and animation art, digital art, and all these things with three important concepts in theater. First, by Saveloth Meyerhold's idea of biomechanics and constructivism in theater, which incorporated body as a distinct, yeah, at the same time, a working acting agency within the spectrum of theater. And constructivism in theater incorporated industrial structures and images from a industrialized society to the world of theater. Breath on the other side initiate the idea of Wolfram-Dung effect, which is wrongly translated in English as alienation effect, but the meaning of the German word Wolfram-Dung is distance. Therefore, the idea of Bertolt Brecht in initiating the idea of Wolfram-Dung in theater was a sort of aesthetic distancing which he drew from Karl Marx. And the third is Jerzy Grotowski and the work of Polish Theatrical Laboratory in Opel, a city in Poland. Grotowski talked about the drives, the process of acting inspired by bodily drives and psychophysical acting. And finally, the idea of poor theater, which embodied a minimalist kind of theater, which initiated the actor's freedom. And the idea of the actor's freedom to improvise, to interpret, and to philosophize finally ended up in the beginning of rise of actor as a seminal personage, a seminal entity in the process of performance, apart from the director, the technical crew, the author, and all. Yeah, till the times of neoclassicism, author was seminal presence in theater. Later, directors have become the seminal presence in theater, but in solo performance, the actor has become the mercurial presence, and the interpreter, the facilitator, the improviser of ideas. In opposition to the invisible actor, there was the rise of a visible actor in solo performance. Invisible Actor is a work by Yoshi Oida, a Japanese modern actor, traditionally trained in no theater, which I recently started to translate his work, Invisible Actor. The actor in solo performance can be placed in antithesis to the invisible actor in traditional, conventional theater. The actor in solo performance is an actor who is visible, who is intervening, who is initiating a debate, initiating the artistic discussion, and an actor works as an agency in social action, such as Anna Devious Smith, Holly Hughes, Karen Findlay, Maya Krishna Rao, Rani Murthy of Resa Theatre, and Reverend Billy. Uh, in between, let's go through some small video clips of solo performance collected from various sources for your information. Santosh, could you play the video clips of Anna Devious Smith?
Which one, please?
Uh, Most famous performers.
No, it's Billy, Finley, great performers.
Great performers.
Okay, just a minute.
Sure. While Santosh is preparing the video, I'll just explain how Anna Devious Smith devised her performances. She is basically an actor belonging to the American conservative theater.
Has it come? Has it come?
It's actually in the process of coming. Please try again.
No, you.
Should I switch off my camera?
No. I'm playing it. Is it visible?
Yes,
Yeah,
sir, it's
yeah. It's a
visible.
bit.
Is interview people, and I did over 300 interviews on 3 continents. I take this large number of interviews that I gather and make me better. I can't talk to you right now. You're using up my cheek. Just think of all the diseases we beat. Cancer suffered. Plague, bubonic plague, cancer suffered. Tuberculosis, cancer suffered. Basically, Living Down Eastway is about human rights,
Yeah, and David Smith.
it's about wellness, it's about power, and it's about vulnerability. And I think in ask the question, had the most caring society that we could. This is the first time I have ever been totally abandoned by the government. It's not the first time for the nurses. I get up and I start trying to occupy my world, to be occupied by suspicious thing. It's not good. Well, this is a very interesting problem. Like when we talk about issues of our well-being, how our to like that's every right. It's not really it's bad. Than it ever.
Okay. Uh, Anna Devere Smith, this artist is Anna Devere Smith, and she employs a peculiar kind of a technique of collecting ideas, words, and images from the community and present characters one by one on stage in front of the people from whom she has collected information. That is one important community-based performance which has become very popular recently. We have a small piece by Maya Krishna Rao. Santosh, could you please play Maya Krishna Rao? Maya Krishna Rao is a very renowned Indian performer who performed widely all over the world. I believe Maya Krishna Rao's piece is not here. Let's try with Reverend Billy. Reverend Billy is an American performer, works against the consumer culture. His work is collectively entitled as Stop Shopping Serious. Reverend Billy, the first one.
Okay. Shall I play it now?
Yes, yes. Reverend Billy assumes the role of a priest from black minstrelsy and start preaching in public venues, including huge shopping malls and designer shops.
Of sort of a anarchic Mormon tabernacle choir.
The once sleepy town of Burlington, Minnesota, a monument for the ages, has risen with their own police force, an amusement park, a wedding chapel, and the first ever college campus built inside of a mall.
It's a huge shopping mall.
with more than 42 million visitors per year. That's more visits than to the Capitol, Mount Rushmore, the Grand Canyon, and Disneyland combined. Behold, the Mall of America.
Reverend Billy's minstrelsy, the church service, is targeted against the evil of consumerism. He wants all these shops to close down and ask people to stop shopping.
We are all ending up inside these super malls. These products are taking over our lives.
Should I just get up there?
Hallelujah! Change, hallelujah! Let's change! We're here in the heart of America. To urge you to join us and many other Americans in saving Christmas from these survivors.
You guys gotta stop protesting or you're gonna have to leave, okay? Okay, well, you gotta walk off property, okay? You're not allowed to be on property.
We're just everywhere. You never know when we're going to show up. You got to stop shopping. Your consumption's getting out of control. Hallelujah. I wasn't nice.
Right now. Never too late.
I'm sorry I yelled at you. I'm sorry. I get angry at police pretty easily. We'll see each other again somewhere.
Yeah. So Reverend Billy is often arrested from the malls by the complaints from the authorities of the malls by the police in various parts of the United States. Let's pass in Kerala. All over India, there is a vibrant tradition of solo theaters recently in the last 2 decades, 2 or 3 decades. And in Kerala, the works by Sajida Madathil, especially two important, solo performances, the beauty parlor and Malsya Gandhi, both are very significant in the context of the feminist politics and the context of marginality in Kerala. And KV Srija also, formulated a solo performance with the title Kalamkairi. Recently, Santosh Kiratu, on the basis of the renowned performer Ochira Velikutti, devised a performance Pen Nadan. And there are 2 or 3 important performers who follow the framework of traditional theatre. Manjulan's Kun and Apunni Sheshi's Terenjedupu and Rajida Mathus, Abubakar Umma Paranjadu, etc. And Kokad Narayan's recent works in a solo performance mode. And I would like to refer to a very important person in the context of solo performance in India, is Ramachandran Mogeri, who was the former director of School of Drama Thrissur, who was an exponent of solo performance art and political protest in India for the last 30 years. And he was arrested in many places. And let's have a small piece of Ramachandran Mogeri's work. Santosh.
Yes, I'll play it.
Yeah, Mogeri. This piece is titled as a beggar's opera, Tendikooth.
Just a narrow, narrow street. I live to nowhere land. Nowhere like the narrow street. I need to nowhere land. Nowhere to play. Like the just a narrow street. I need to nowhere land. Nowhere is like this. I'm just a narrow street. I need to nowhere land. Nowhere to play. Like this.
This is interesting to see. Moghetti has gathered information from various sources, materials from images, photographs, newspapers, music, television, and all.
I'm just a narrow street. It's just a narrow life. But it's tactical and inspired. All the money that's made here. Build your platform. Let us make the believe that I'm you. As a tell you, have to the name of God. Kill the mothers, drive the mothers, tell you, have to the name of God. Kill the brothers, drive the sisters, tell you, have to the name of God. Kill the children, drive the sisters, tell you, have to the name of God. Kill the home, drive the land, tell you, have to the name of God. Make the peace, flash and peace, tell you, have to the name of God. Make the peace, flash and peace, tell you, have to the name of God.
The ritual blessing. Hello. Yeah. Ramchandran Mogherini has incorporated a wide, materials from a wide variety of sources, such as images, music, musical instruments, costumes, etc., and photographs from newspaper, video clips from television, etc. At this point of time, these the video clippings of various performance arts performing perform solo performances by various artists now pave the way for the possibility of an evolution of a new art form, an online solo performance. Today there was a news from Finland. The music of COVID-19 from Finland. Finnish music industry is pretty huge, and within the lockdown of 2 months, Finnish music industry suffered a loss of around 127 million euros. And if the close down goes up to July, the loss will raise up to 150 million euros. And by an exceptional use of online platforms and digital networks, the music companies, orchestras, music festivals, and even the street musicians, which are very popular, especially in Helsinki. Street musicians started to build their own platforms to reduce the loss during the lockdown, and finally that ended up in the rise of a new sort of digitally mediated music industry in Finland. Similarly, in performing arts, solo performance arts, including in the classrooms, there is a bright future with the help of digitally mediated performances. And this presentation ultimately tries to inquire the possibility of solo performance online in social media platforms and online platforms. Theater is seminally distinct as a live art form where the actor and the spectator are physically present. And the debate over the physical presence of the actor and spectator has two dimensions. Peggy Phelan, an eminent performance critic, argued that performance art is essentially the location of physical presence of the actor and the spectator. At the same time, Philip Oslander, who criticized Peggy Phelan's views on the physical presence of the actor and spectator, argued that the very idea of live comes from the world of mediation, following the arguments of Jean Baudrillard and others. Therefore, the physical presence, see, for example, live, a cricket match which is telecast live is far more reliable and specific than the actual cricket match. Therefore, that's why cricket matches of cricket and football matches have become a better commodity in television broadcast networks. So live is far more livelier and active than the actual physical presence of the actor and the spectator. Because of this context of mediation, especially in the digital context, solo performance can be treated as live performance in digitally mediated platforms. And this here in a digitally mediated platform, the role of the actor is entirely different from the role of the actor in traditional solo performances and traditional theater. The actor, you see, Savlov Meyerhold defined the actor as a conglomeration of actor as a mass of an organizer of material and material. That is, actor equal to organizer of material plus the materials. Therefore, the actor comprises of as a facilitator an organizer of materials and the materials collected by him. If the actor is not simply a human entity, but it's a physical presence and an institution where which include all the materials which he gathered from outside. And the idea of theater as a teamwork, a collective work, also is a contested idea in the wake of the COVID lockdown and physical distancing. Therefore, the availability of technical crew and technical support and the public venues and the presence of the spectators are quite an impossibility in the present moment. Therefore, people who are interested in promoting the idea of solo performance can be viewed as a new performance genre, a new theater genre in which the actor reigns supreme, and the actor's body uh, enacts both as a facilitator of the live and mediated performance. At the same time, serves as an agency which initiate social and community action. And therefore, actor in solo performance is not simply an actor in the traditional sense, but the actor is a facilitator, an organizer, an interpreter, an improviser, and definitely a philosopher who defines the world of performance around him. And the actor can gather his material from personal, collective, and social experiences, and documents from various sources, including internet, and images from photographs, from galleries, from museums, from archives, etc. Therefore, actor as an agency in solo performance has a newly redefined role in the context of online, digitally mediated solo performances, where the actor is an interrogating mercurial presence who questions the hegemony and dismantles hierarchies and social structures in through his performance. At the same time, as a socially initiated action, the actor, on the one hand, the actor intervenes in biographical construction of the narrative. On the other side, he is embarked uh, on education, community-based reflection, entertainment, etc., and social action. And this new genre of performance, digitally mediated solo performance, has a wide possibility as a medium of education, as a medium of community action, as a medium of social science research and ethnography, as a medium of explicit, exhibition of crisis of identity and politics of identity. And for this presentation, I was actually trying to bring in the idea of the actor as a seminal mercurial presence in the digitally mediated solo performances in online platforms and social mediated platforms. I conclude my presentation by placing the actor at the center of solo performances, which are digitally mediated. Now it's time for a small discussion with other participants.
Thank you, sir. That was a really interesting talk. Uh, Dr. Biju here had talked about art largely, and specifically about solo performances. In the context of a post-pandemic era, where popular performance spaces are being largely closed, and the very title of the paper, the lonely actor, I guess, is very relatable to everybody. I mean, we are all turning lonely actors because you know, all kinds of community interactions are being leveled down or not happening. So, sir also talked about the also historicized the importance of solo performances, in asserting the identities of various minority communities. Also talked about the various forms of solo performances in various cultures, including that of Kerala, and the different platforms that the solo performances are happening, including digitally mediated platforms. And sir also emphasized on how solo performances actually helps dismantle various forms of hegemonies. So now we open this we open this talk to discussions. You can share your questions, comments in the chat box. Thank you.
Shaima, a couple of questions have already come in. You can just pick them out, and I hope you can read it
Okay.
from.
Yeah.
Please pick out
Sir,
questions related to this topic
yes,
only.
sir. Sir, we have a question from Ritvik Shankar, who asks, what will be the future of the ritual performing arts? Sir, can you hear me?
Uh, yeah, sure. Uh, Ritual performance art, which is connected with the collective action of communities, mostly religious. Sometimes ritual performance art has connected to political organizations, etc. But the future of all these such performances depends on which all such performances depend on the future of post-COVID societies, lockdown, and physical distancing. Uh, all art forms, all collective art forms, which are exhibited collectively amidst many people. But ritual theater also, what happens in the churches and other religious places of religious worship at the moment, religious festivals, community festivals, they are all, for the namesake, performed for the namesake at times, but not with the full vigor. This is the future of all sorts of collective popular performances, from all, of all genres. And, there will be alternative forms for this in future.
Okay, thank you, sir. We have another query by one Grishma case, who wants to know the name of Sajida Madatil's solo performance.
I have actually a small, I have an entire piece of Malsigandhi with me, but because of the constraints of time, we couldn't show that piece. Some of these sections of Sajida Madatil's Malsigandhi is available YouTube. You can search for that, which both the beauty parlor, which beauty parlor was performed in the 90s, and Malsigandhi, both are interesting pieces. The pieces available, the video clips available of Malsigandhi is not performed by Sajida Madatil, but by Shailaja. Uh, yeah, that's available online.
Okay. We have another question by Shyam Zoba, who asks if we can find any connection between Ramachandran Mogheri's performance and Augusto Boal's Invisible Theatre.
Ball's theater has its, which is basically a pedagogical sort of theater, an educational theater, which works with communities. Definitely, at times it shifts its shape from a pedagogical theater to a political theater. But Ramachandran Mogheri's theater fundamentally is a protest art form, which draws source from many places, but at the same time, which tries to unsettle the political cultural and other institutions in our society. There are connections, but which are both are not the same.
Okay. So we have another question by one Kevin Fernandez. He asks, what is the role of platforms like TikTok and Snapchat in solo performances? How do we understand the middle classes discussed for the same?
Yes, these online platforms are, I've actually considered them as a bundle together. TikTok and all these online platforms are very effective in bringing out solo performance. And, I also, I didn't have time to mention Mr. Kokar Narayan's work and the online solo performance competitions which were conducted recently in the last 2 months in various parts of India, especially in Kerala. And that small piece is with Santosh, a small solo performance by Kokar Narayan, who is not trained in any way, but who accomplishes wonderfully a small piece without even dialogues. So all these social media, online, digital platforms have very particular importance in promoting solo performances.
Okay. Santosh sir, do we have time for more questions?
No, we have to wind up in 5 minutes because the resource person for the next session, Priya ma'am, is already in. She joined us in the beginning itself. So with one or two questions in 5 minutes, we have to wind up, and we will need just 2 minutes time to switch on to the next session also. So two more
Okay, sir.
questions can be accommodated.
Yeah, we have a question by Biju sir. We have a question by Raji. She asks, won't there be any challenges and problems for the solo performers when they move to an online platform?
By the way, I would like to mention a performance which is published today in Facebook by Chilanga Productions. Dilip Chilanga performed a work called Migrant. If you search, or otherwise, I can share that performance with the help of Prasad, his friend. Which incorporated the life of a migrant through, in a sort of a grotesque acting, incorporating images and graphics from various sources, etc. See, about answer to the question, the challenges is the life of a solo performer right from the beginning of beginning that genre from the time of experimentations in modernism. Therefore, digital platform, of course, is a challenge to any performer, and any solo performer in particular. But these challenges can be overcome by the resources available at the moment. If you go through that work, Migrant by Dilip Chelanga, you'll find how beautifully the actor, there's also a solo online performance, that performer has overcome the constraints of physical presence, lack of audience, etc., through incorporating graphics, images, and words.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. This was really a very productive session and a very interesting talk. Thank you once again for your talk. Over to Reshma.
Thank you, Shama. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shama. Thank you to yes, Srihari and Santosh and all the whole Department of English, Payyanur College, and all the people who participated patiently for the very last 1 hour. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have a formal vote of thanks also. Sir.
Am I audible, Shema? Am I audible?
Reshma, yeah, you are.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Okay. Since we are approaching the end of the webinar, here I would like to invite my colleague, Mrs. Shamali P, to propose vote of thanks. Shamali P.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Shyam, yeah.
First and foremost, I would like to thank Dr. C.S. Biju for his presentation titled The Lonely Actor, Solo Theatre in Difficult Times. He described in detail how this pandemic leads to political, cultural crisis, and he talked about various solo performances all over the world. and he also gave a detailed description how solo performance challenges authority. Thank you, Dr. Biju, once again. Next, I would like to thank our principal and head of the Department of English, Dr. Pramachandra. I thank Dr. V.M. Santosh, IQAC coordinator. Now, I would like to thank all the participants for their active participation. I thank Reshma, my colleague, for her lively and spirited comparing. I also thank Kerala Higher Education Council and Faculty of Languages, Doha University, Oman. Last but not the least, many thanks to Dr. A.C. Srihari, Dr. Shaima P. and Dr. Aishwarya P.K. for wonderfully coordinating the function. Thank you all.
Here we mark the end of this session. Over to you, Santosh sir. Santosh sir.
Okay, Reshma. Okay. So thank you, Reshma, and thank you, Dr. Biju, once again. I hope you will be staying with us for the next session also. And as already mentioned, Dr. Priya K. Nair has joined us at 10 a.m. itself this morning. And we'll take just a 1-minute break because I have got message from some that they are not able to log in. So I will just log out myself and come back in 1 minute. So you can make use of that as a relaxation, refreshing break for you also. We will resume in 1 minute, and that will be the session by Dr. Priya K. Nair, and it will be anchored by Nivedita. So Nivedita, please get ready. Just 1 minute. So if any of your friends are outside this meeting and they are waiting for re-entry, please ask them to try now. Now it's okay. That technical issue is sorted. I hope I'm audible to you all. Nivedita, please switch on your mic. Nivedita.
Yes, sir.
You are anchoring this session, right?
Yes, sir. Sir, am I audible and visible?
You are audible. Priya ma'am, you can also unmute yourself. Priya ma'am. Okay. Welcome. So, Nivedita, over to you for beginning the session.
Sir, am I visible?
You are visible. Then just one more announcement, please. You know, we are receiving queries about the attendance. I tell you, please don't worry about the attendance. You attend both the sessions, get enriched academically, and all those participants who have attended at least one day shall be given certificate. Don't worry about that. And we will be posting the details about the attendance towards the end of this session. Please stay with us till the end of this session because we have a few announcements also to make. So we go straight away to the session. So over to you, Nivedita. Nivedita, it seems there is some problem with the audio. Please check once more. Please say something.
Sir, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible, but it's yes. Okay. Okay.
Hello, sir. Hello. Concluding statement. And in this session, our resource presentation teaching by the pandemic.
Again, some Nivedita, some problem with your audio. Anyway, okay. Thank you for the introduction, and I hope you have invited Amrita for introducing the research person, right?
Hello, everyone. Am I audible? Santosh, sir?
Yeah, you are audible. Proceed.
Hello, everyone. I welcome Dr. Priya K. Nair for our last session of this two-day international webinar. Now, let me speak a few words about our distinguished guest. She is an assistant professor at the Department of English, St. Teresa's College, Ernakulam. Currently, she's an education and research professor at the Kerala State Higher Education Council, Trivandrum. She has also worked as assistant professor at RAT MHSU at Ras Al Khaimah, UAE, and at Technical College, Cherthala. She is a research guide of the Mahatma Gandhi University and is presently guiding 7 scholars. She has also translated T.D. Ramakrishnan's novels, Francis Itikora and Sugandhi Elias Antal Devanayaki. And she has also authored textbooks. Areas of interest include literary theory, culture studies, post-colonial studies, gender studies, translation studies, and English language teaching. She has a postgraduate diploma in journalism from Symbiosis. She has also done CELTA from London, UK. Thank you, ma'am, for sparing your time despite your busy schedule. I invite you to deliver the talk on the topic, Teaching Biopolitics Within a Pandemic. Welcome, ma'am.
Amrita, everybody except Priya, ma'am, please turn off the mic. Amrita, including yourself.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Yes.
All right. And visible, I hope.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Santosh, Dr. Srihari, Amrita, Nivedita, and the entire team of Payyanur College for giving me an opportunity to speak to all of you during this time of crisis, this pandemic, or the calamity that we are all undergoing. And when Dr. Biju spoke about the lonely actor, I was thinking about the lonely teacher and how we will be forced to sort of move away from the brick and mortar classrooms into the online platforms where, for me as a teacher, I gain a lot of energy from the physical presence of my students. And now with all these webinars going on, I'm slowly cultivating myself to speaking to a blank audience where I cannot see the audience, I cannot gauge their physical responses, and thereby I cannot alter my talk in order to suit the physical responses or the physical feedback which is spontaneous, which I usually get from my audience. So that is the biological body responding to technology in a very different manner, I think. So when I was thinking about English literature teachers in the time of a pandemic and how they would go about teaching, I was sort of flooded with many questions from my students. Now, how do you make sense of Foucault during this time? How do you make sense of Agamben, particularly because Agamben, in the end of March, criticized the Italian government. He wrote an article which said that this is just a media created. This is just something the government has blown out of proportion so that they can control the biological bodies. Now, how do you make sense of all this? Well, let me tell you at the outset, I'm not trying to make sense of anything. I'm just trying to look at this particular catastrophe, particular time, the turbulent times, I must say, through multiple perspectives. And like somebody else told me, a non-academic friend once asked me, now what is the sense of people doing all these webinars? It's rather like Nero fiddling while Rome was burning. But I guess that's what we have to do. We have to make music because music will last. The catastrophe will disappear. And this time, I think we must take a deep look at ourselves, try to consider what we have done and where we are and how best we can sort of progress from here or move out from here. So these are multiple questions that I'll be raising, not that I have a solution, because there is no one solution to a global situation. It is rather dependent upon the geo-local context in which we inhabit. And at that point of time, certain thoughts came to my mind, and one was a 2015 Oscar award-winning movie called The Big Short, B-I-G-S-H-O-R-T, The Big Short. that movie was very technical in the sense that it dealt in depth with the financial markets, the share market, the mortgagings, and the credit bubble which had burst. This was very, very technical, and it is written with jargon. The main point of the movie is that they sort of restructured the entire thing so that anybody would understand it. And they sort of brought in people from different streams of life. They had Ryan Gosling, who builds a Jenga tower and takes out the bottom bricks to show how crazy the building is. You know, once you remove the basic foundation, the edifice will cease to exist. And you have Marge Robert, the actress, and she's bathing in a bathtub filled with soap bubbles, and she tells you how fragile the economy is because it's as fragile as a soap bubble. And finally, you have a chef, a world famous chef, Anton Bourdain, who comes to you with a 2-day-old fish and dresses it up in a very tempting manner and sells it to you, just to show you that, you know, this is how most financial deals are made. So I thought that this movie made a lot of sense because we are trying to deal with the biological body, the pathological body. We're also trying to deal with the idea of medicine, inoculation, vaccination, along with the economy and the nature of freedom as well. So the 3 Ds which sort of emerge are data, democracy, and demagoguery. Because, you know, we have all these, the post-truth scenario, which is filled with people coming up with their own ideas, which they believe is the truth. So how do we negotiate this minefield? How do we sort of emerge with a perspective that is all inclusive, that doesn't sort of segregate one body from the other based on gender or financial status or illness? So the 3 images that perhaps come to one's mind, one is the global community of biological bodies. Pan culturally, you have human bodies, which are all, uh, what do I say, in a precarious situation. The precarious, we've all become precarious in that manner, and we're all susceptible to diseases. So that is one image that comes to mind. And the next is you have these borders which are clearly drawn, the nation state which has slowly but very strongly come into your conscious mind once more, where borders are very clearly drawn, and the virus which doesn't actually pay any attention or any heed to any sort of natural or unnatural boundaries. And finally, another image, a striking image which came to my mind, were the toilet rolls that were flying off the shelves in the UK and the US, people actually fighting over the toilet rolls. And I thought that, you know, this is an example. I think Arjuna Appadure also very clearly wrote about it. She said, it is an example of bourgeoisie culture. It is a pinnacle of consumer capitalism and to the depths that it can take you, because they were unmindful. Even Zizek has made an interesting comment on this. He said, now we know that the toilet rolls are aplenty, that there is no dearth of toilet rolls. But supposing the rumor is true, that there is a dearth, and this sort of the double bind situation that Zizek always presents us with, now that was actually talking about a very serious issue, the issue of consumer capitalism. And then again, you come to the next point. What is a nation? Is a nation its people, its citizens, or is a nation its economy? If you listen to people like Trump, you will clearly understand that the economy is privileged over the people. I mean, I don't know who to blame. I don't know who we are pointing fingers at, but that is another situation. What the idea of a nation, is it, who do we prioritize? Do we prioritize health? Do we prioritize the citizens? Or do we prioritize the economy? So when we come back to this concept, the toilet rolls and people fighting over the toilet rolls, you find consumer capitalism there, because you find toilet rolls which advertise different colors, textures, perfumes on one side, and on the other, there are communities, there are societies which do not have toilets at all. So sanitation becomes a huge problem here. And when we emerge and when we come to the next level of the pandemic, we will realize that countries which have more infrastructure, more sanitation measures, lesser population, they might recover quicker than a country with all these categories within them. And another word, the COVID vocabulary which has contributed is the new normal. You know, this is actually a very a poetic word like post-truth, because when you talk about post-truth, The idea is that before we came into this idea of post-truth, there was an era when people spoke only the truth. So when we talk about the new normal, the idea is that there was something actually normal. Well, very personally, I don't think that we were ever normal as such. If you view us from the ecological point of us, means humanity at large. If you look at us from the gender point of view, if you look at us from the ecological point of view, the economical point of view, humanity as such was never normal. We were rather greedy. We were very much interested in ourselves, very self-oriented people. So coming to this idea of data, democracy, and demagoguery, I think we will have to go into the idea of globalization as well, the idea of the governmentality, the idea of the power structure which is being used to control people, to control the epidemic, the sanitation measures that are being used, and of course, demagoguery, the pub speaking of or the ideas that are circulated, which sort of sometimes racialize the virus, communalize the virus. You give the virus a particular identity, a particular religion, you give the identity. All these things happen within the ambit of the post-truth or the demagoguery. The next crisis which has happened is this blurring of the boundary between the private and the public. For a long time now, we've lived in the virtual scenario, and Facebook and Instagram have been public confessional booths where you come out and talk about things that you wouldn't talk to a physically present person. So now, what about the protests? What about resistance movements? Will they be allowed the public space, or will they have to move into the private realm of the virtual world? That is one question. Another question is the private world is being intensely publicized. The very glaring example is your route map. Now, supposing you are diagnosed with a disease, immediately they will ask you to look at your route map. So nothing is private anymore. And another thing that we must here notice is that till a particular point of time, we were very reluctant to give up information. We were reluctant to ask for information. Now it has become a matter of right. I demand to know where my neighbor has come from. I demand to know where the person sitting next to me has come from. And we are complicit in surveillance. It's not that we are resisting it. It's not that we are complaining about it. We feel that it is perhaps not enough. We have to be surveilled more. You look at yourselves and you look at the other as well with a lot of suspicion, with a lot of problems. So there were questions regarding now how to teach Foucault, how to teach Camus' Plague. And I think there is a character in Plague which explains his persistence in fighting the plague in this manner. He says, there is no question of heroism. It's a matter of common decency. And I think that is something that we need to internalize. It is just a matter of common decency to respect the other, to take care of the other as much as we take care of ourselves. And yeah, Camus, I think, was talking about resistance and how people can come together in a crisis and resist this particular crisis. So coming together doesn't mean physical proximity. It can mean emotional, mental proximity. And another text which I found very interesting was written in the wake of the SARS virus of 2005, and it is called Networked Diseases, Emerging Infections in Global Cities. So, they come up with very interesting ideas which are quite relevant to these times as well. It's called Networked Diseases, Emerging Infections in Global Cities. And the book says that the public health challenges are global. And when we talk about globalization, we talk about intense fluidity of movement, movement of people, movement of food, movement of food products, interchange of ideas. So along with humans, along with food, what moves are pathogens? What moves are viruses? So the question is, how do we prevent the pathogens from spreading, and how do we enable humans from moving as freely as they possibly can? So I think when we discuss the pandemic and we discuss the theoretical aspects of biopolitics, we have to bring in the equation of globalization as well, because within globalization, any event can have unexpected, disproportionate, and emergent effects which are distant in time and space from where they occurred. So the epicenter might be very far away, but the impact will be felt all over, because that is how the world has constructed itself. And the cities, even now, if you look at it, the cities are the most affected. And in the world economy, cities have always been connected through material and information flows, the labor market, the investment cycles. So, what was not that clear was that the global cities could also work as a network for disease transmission. We just looked at the positive aspects of it. There were people at that time also telling us about the downside of globalization, but we sort of looked at the positive side, and now we understand that the flows of human beings and pathogens are intimately linked. And if you look at the patterns of human travel within globalization, we understand that the travel of pathogen and the distribution of the pathogens has also taken the same route. So here we have to look at the scaled hierarchy of global cities as it has become the conduit of disease transmission. So there's another reality which has become very clearly visible. That is, there are 2 points here. One is that the global cities hierarchy is a very complex network of topological relations. This happens externally, that is, one city connected to the other, and internally, the capillary system of the globalized metropolis. So within the city and cities connecting themselves to each other. So both these connections have to be closely scrutinized, and then it becomes very clear how cities act as conduits for the transmission of bodies and of pathogens. So when such cities were conceptualized, there are the ideas that were foregrounded were mobility, flow, and dynamism. And the consideration of such factors is very clearly understood through the networked and the topological understandings of the city. So the urban space is very closely studied in the wake of virus transmission. So we have a lot of points to consider here: the speed and ease of global travel and the rapid uneven urbanization. That is very crucial, the uneven structure of urbanization and poverty. And of course, you have the aging population as well, where your time on the surface of the earth is extended through different mechanisms, through medical technology and interventions. And the idea of the body, which becomes extremely important here. So let's just think about how we were before the pandemic struck. We were very interested in the human body. Like when you, for example, think of what Donna Haraway said. She said, we are cyborgs, a mixture of human and machine. And this is something that we actually welcomed, because we thought that we are extending our capacity to think, extending our capacity to work. Like we had robotics, which would do the physical labor, and artificial intelligence, or AI as it is called, to do the thinking for us. So the human body was in process of being constantly reinvented, and a lot of attention was being paid to it as well, because we sort of thought that the medical industry, I would call it the medical industry, would help us to do whatever we want to with our body. Change the facial features, skin transplant, organ transplant. So you could do anything, you could play around with your body, was an idea that had set in, at least in the West, at least in technologically and economically developed countries. But here, when you move from that situation into another situation, when you sort of guarding yourself against these viruses, we sort of rethink all these ideas. And there are many questions which are being raised. So what are the bioinformational cross-border flows that post-date the nation state? So like I told you, you have to think about the nation state as well in the idea of globalization. We now know that the nation state has emerged as a very powerful entity. Now, we had Benedict Anderson, who spoke about nationalism and as an imaginaire, and boundaries as cartography as highly questionable. But now we have people who very strongly insist on boundaries being drawn. So the question is, there is globalization and there is the nation state as well. But there is no way the nation state can survive in the modern contemporary times without the economic fueling of globalization. So this is another concept that we have to think about. Another question which was raised is, which is the political system which works best at quarantine and social isolation? Is it a very strong rulership, or is it individualism which works better? And is there a difference in the way the East and the West cope with rules? How well do they obey rules? This was another question which was raised. And the relationship between the government and science, the ruling structure and science, what has this done? And again, the question of the viral news that has circulated, whether it was fake news, whether it was real, where we had no much method to find out what was true and what was not true. So I think I will begin with Foucault's notion of biopolitics and move on into Arendt's and Fassin's idea of biolegitimacy. These are just ideas which have been used to sort of frame the current situation, to look at it from a new perspective. So Foucault's concept of biopolitics assumes that you look at the biological features of an entire population. They're aggregated and measured, and life becomes an independent, objective, measurable factor, as well as a collective reality. So you take the population as a whole and you divide the population based on certain categories so that you can understand the demographics better, and knowledge, which is very closely associated with power as well. So Foucault uses the term biopolitics in multiple senses, and it constantly shifts in meaning. First, it is characterized by a rearticulation of sovereign power and your response towards this rearticulation of sovereignty. Next, in the idea of modern racism and how biopolitics functions as a dynamic within the idea of racism. The third meaning of the concept, there are multiple, I just stick to three: a distinctive art of government that engages itself with social regulation and individual self-governance. So both. One, the power structure, which imposes itself on us, not top-down, but in a capillary fashion, and the individual looking at himself, looking at herself, and trying to make sense of the multiple power structures that are sprung up around us. So the anatomopolitics of the human body conceives the human body not just as a biological entity, but as a complex machine. So rather than repressing or concealing, it works by constituting perceptual grids and physical routines. So you're moving away from the traditional forms of domination like slavery, of serfdom, and you're thinking of disciplining your body so that the body becomes most productive, and how it fuels the economic engine of capitalism. So here, I think from Foucault, we just move to Butler, who came up with some perspectives or some ideas during this era. And she says, the imperative to isolate. So this is where Foucault also brings in his three models of control of the population. So Butler responds to this concept when she speaks of the imperative to isolate within the new recognition of a global interdependence. And she speaks about how we were asked to move into the family, move into the home. But the problem is not everybody has a household, not everybody has a family. So the household, which figured in the idea of the power structure as a space of protection, is hardly true for many people. We know the trails and travails of the migrant laborers. We've heard of the gender politics that happens within the family. And when I say gender politics, I do not at any point of time try to privilege women. There are men who are equally penalized within the four walls of the house. Therefore, the household, which was supposed to be sacrosanct, which was supposed to be very cozy, protective place, was hardly that for most people. And the virus doesn't discriminate. It treats us all equally. So the way the virus moves and strikes, it demonstrates that the global community is very precarious. But then, if you look at the body of these precariats, there were some bodies which did not matter as much. For example, the aged people in certain cultures, the people who had, they call it comorbidity. So, right, that was an excuse. So they were already ill. Or the people who couldn't afford the treatment, or people who didn't even know that they were ill. So these things, not even within the pandemic, even without outside the pandemic, this happens when these sort of people are bodies that do not matter. And these are the biopolitical elements. And when we look at the nation, and when you look at Trump, who said that return to business as usual, it meant risking the mortality rates, which is quite justified. And this is all right because the most vulnerable people are affected: the elderly, the homeless, the comorbidity condition, and as long as the economy can be protected. So that's the question I raised in the beginning. Now, what is a nation? Is a nation its economy, or is it the boundary, or is it people? this is not an easy question to answer. This is never an easy question to answer. So, the daily news headlines highlight the sharp decline of the world economy, the capitalist recession. So, you have, if you look at the newspaper and the dynamics of the newspaper, on one side, you will have the number of deaths, the number of people who have been identified with the disease. Equally important is the fear of recession, the fear of people losing their jobs. The framing of the COVID-19 pandemic is also the framing of an economic crisis. It reveals the priorities that are at work, but also indicates the limited tools that the state has. And this is at a time when human beings were sort of very proud of ourselves, that thinking that we had conquered or mastered everything that we could or absolutely do. And this comes as a sort of reality check. And coming back to Foucault, I think because we're running short of time, I will quickly look at Foucault and the three diseases that he has used to frame models of power. At the end of the Middle Ages, leprosy, coming back to Foucault, disappeared from the Western world. It didn't disappear completely, and the leprous area were emptied to make room, according to Foucault's somewhat controversial thesis, as an exclusion from society of the poor, the vagabonds, the sick, and the mad. So these people were being brought together. And for Foucault, this was an early model of power, where power separates the healthy from the sick, excludes the deviants. Now, who were the deviants is a matter of conjecture and questionable categorization. And they were outside the city gates. Don't bother about them. And from there, you have the new model of power, which he spoke about in Discipline and Punish, the plague model. Here, deviants were no longer simply excluded and locked up. Everyone, children, soldiers, prisoners, the poor, were subjected to a rigorous discipline. That is, make these bodies productive so as to fuel the economy. So again, the bodies that mattered in certain ways, but did not matter in other ways. And the next model is a smallpox model. And here, the inoculation practices is what is highlighted. The primarily economic freedom of the individuals emerged in a new way as something irreducible, something absolutely fundamental. And Foucault developed this particular model. And it is based on the abandonment of the dream, where you can completely eradicate pathogens or intruders or germs, and you survey the society in depth to discipline the movements of all. Like, you cannot sort of control the movement of everybody. So what you do is you understand that the pathogen has to live along with you. I think when you look at the world today, you find all these different models. Sometimes the same country will have the three different models in existence, but perhaps emerging new models as well. Here you have medical campaigns, the power collects data, compiles statistics, and takes on the character of disciplinarization of individuals. You find these three models either transiting from one to the other or coexisting at the same point of time. And here, again, I would like to call your attention to Roberto Esposito and his paradigm of immunization. And he shows that the modern concepts of security, property, and freedom can only be understood within the logic of immunity. So, characteristic of this logic is an inner connection between life and politics, in which immunity protects and promotes life, while also it limits life's expansive and productive power. Now, I will not be drawing examples from the current scenario, because that is something that all of us have to do from our own geolocal context. Like, that is where post-theory and nomadic ideas come in. You cannot have a single formula to control all the emerging notions, emerging events. This is something that has to emerge out of ourselves, our reading, and the application of such ideas. So the immunitory logic which Esposito puts forward leads from maintenance of life to a negative form, to protecting it, and finally to the negation of life in certain aspects in order to protect it from other aspects. So this idea of immunity allows two opposing dimensions of biopolitics. One is advancement and development of life, and its destruction and elimination to be conceived as two constitutive aspects of a common problematic. So for Esposito, as well as for most thinkers, the racial and extermination policies of the Nazis uh, were the most extreme form of immunitarian rationality, where life politics developed into the politics of death. It has been called thanatopolitics or necropolitics, like Achilles Membe puts it, which bodies are fated to die. And like I told you about the three models of power which Foucault has put forward. And from here, I would like to go into the concept that Edward Fassin has put forward. So Fassin is a medical anthropologist, and the biopolitical determination of ethical meaning and action across unequal fields of power is a topic of interest for Didier Fassin, Tickton, and Peter Redfield. Now, they start thinking about biopolitics and biological existence of the humans from this organization known in the US called Doctors Without Borders. And this term, I think when I started reading through biopolitics, Fassin's idea of biolegitimacy was what struck me as being peculiarly relevant in the contemporary times. His term biolegitimacy traces a fundamental political realignment where the sick or the injured body is assigned a central political meaning. So Fassin is not talking about the COVID-19 issue at all. Fassin is talking about any virus or any disease, and the injured body, the sick body, is given a very important political meaning. So biolegitimacy, he says, and he looks into the idea of nationalism, he looks into the idea of migration and refugee status also when he talks about biolegitimacy. So biolegitimacy, he says, is an instrument and device for the production of rights. And it gives you the right to demand services and care from the state. It is a means to demand and conquer rights, and it is also an expression of a new biopolitical regime. So, biolegitimacy is articulated with a broader context of a political shift, with emphasis on the process of pathologization, medicalization, or biologization of social experiences. So I think this is where Fassin becomes quite important, because if you note, he talks about pathologization, medicalization, and biologization of social experiences. Like, you talk about physical distancing, you talk about wearing masks, you talk about hand sanitization, and this particularly concerns the production of public policies and actions of the states in the fields of rights and citizenship. So Fassin begins from the recognition that the right to life has gained priority on human rights agenda in relation to social and economic rights. So this is where we are at present, I think. You have your social rights, you have your economic rights, and what emerges more important is the right to life. So this is where Arendt has also spoken about the right to life, and she says that that must be considered a pan-human right, not the right of a particular group of people, a particular race or a gender, but a pan-human right. So an additional development that these thinkers contribute to the biopolitical analysis is they link the knowledge, power, and subjectification together. And they link also the body, life, biological knowledge, medical evidence, legal knowledge of the biological body, and power. So the legal knowledge of the biological body is another crucial factor, because I'll just give you an example. If you have listened to me before, I'm sorry, there are certain examples which I use time and again. This is an example from Henrietta Lack's story. It is an incident which actually happened in the US in the 50s. And Henrietta Lacks was a 56-year-old Black woman who went to the hospital to get treated for cancer. And her cells, cervical cells, were taken for investigation. Right? So there was nothing called informed consent. She was told that they are taking these cells for testing. But the HeLa cells, as they were later called, were miraculous in medical terminology. They never died. They developed. They sort of reproduced themselves. And the HeLa cells were used across laboratories for testing, for developing medicine, the pharmaceutical industries. Everybody used it. But Henrietta Lacks died, but her children or her family never benefited economically from the use of the HeLa cells. So this was a medical issue. It was an individual issue of right to informed consent. It was a legal issue. It was an economic issue. So this is what I'm trying to connect here, where the body is both biological, political, and social, and also the medical knowledge also comes in. And I think in different countries, the way the doctor behaves the patient also is very political in that manner. How much of information is given to you? In the West, only the patient is given information about the patient's illnesses. I think perhaps in Kerala, everybody around knows what the patient is suffering from. The last person to know is the patient. So these are local contexts where the rights and duties and the idea of information and control change from space to space and time to time. So you have certain articles like I think this is a very interesting article if you want to read it. It's Ticktin, Ticktin, Ticktin's article, which is titled "How Biology Travels: A Humanitarian Trip," and it demonstrates a revelatory capacity regarding contemporary biopolitical conditions through the case of asylum seekers. Now, this is where Arendt's idea of the stateless, worldless person comes in. So how biolegitimacy and the biopolitical human conditions are linked together when it comes to a person looking to gain status as a refugee, the status of stateless persons. And I think when we talk of stateless persons in India, we have another dynamics to address, the concept of not the concept, the reality of the migrant worker, the itinerant worker, I would say, because I don't know how migrant is becoming a proper term here, because migrant always talks about a border, crossing of borders beyond the national boundaries. So perhaps itinerant workers. And like Arendt's stateless people, they must demonstrate their unworth as political participants in their host society to gain some sort of legal recognition. So this is the concept that Arendt has put forward when it comes to gaining access to another country. So here, Fassin states that, I'm talking about the refugee crisis here, and the stateless and the worldless people that Arendt has put forward. And Fassin states, in quite contrast to Agamben, that the biopolitical relationship between the body and the state does not take the status or the form of a violent prohibition or ban. He sees a rather subtle movement of bodies at work, that one organizes itself around health and corporeal integrity as central values. And this is the main reason why I have chosen Fassin to talk about rather than many other biopolitical thinkers. So Fassin, again, he talks about matters of life and longevity, health and illness. And he says, these things cannot be separated from social inequality. There are certain brilliant examples that he gives. He says, a 35-year-old unskilled worker in France can expect on an average to live a life 9 years shorter than an engineer or a teacher of the same age. So that the statistical life expectancy in Uganda is half as high as it is in Japan. So these data reflect collective choices and normative preferences in a given society, or perhaps on a global scale. So these decision-making processes remain, according to Fassin, mostly implicit, since governments are only rarely prepared to declare publicly that they allow some people to live shorter lives than others, or even that some people are sacrificed for others. So this is the example that Fassin gives. So here you have an inversion of priorities in the contemporary moral and political field, in which the right to life becomes a challenge to social rights and economic rights, and this would impose itself in detriment to the others. So I hope this is clear, where the right to life becomes a question mark here, and you have two other matrices to address. One is the social right and one is the economic right. And Fassin calls this difference between two perspectives the conflict of two ethical communities that have an unequal legitimacy. So please remember that Fassin is talking about the refugees, the stateless people gaining access, and where their right to life becomes challenged with the right to work of other communities there. If you remember the word Bangalore, if you remember the wall that was meant to be built in, separating Mexico, perhaps this will become clear. So bare life appears from this perspective as a vector for biolegitimacy. So for Fassin, humanitarianism is not a closed social field of action that is defined and administered by NGOs, but it is a moral principle that grants absolute human life priority. So human life becomes prioritized within this idea of humanitarianism. And according to Fassin, it is more and more apparent in the social domain that the body functions as a final authority on political legitimacy. So, coming again once more, focusing on Fassin and his assessment of social development and biolegitimacy, the humanitarian logic is the highest ethical ideal. This is quite ambivalent here. So, I'll just go into Fassin's concepts. He says he welcomes the tendency for punishment to be replaced by care and surveillance by compassion. But he also believes that it has led to a reformulation of political problems as moral and medical ones. So, social suffering mixes with bodily suffering, and the boundary between the social and the medical dissolves. Fassin states that in order to analyze contemporary societies, it is necessary not only to consider biopower as a power over life, but also to view biolegitimacy as the legitimacy of life, since government operates not so much on the body as through the body. So the decision-making process, as I already said, is quite complex, and it again depends on the economy of the country, the political outlook of the country, and of course, the place where the asylum seeker comes from. And he gives you another example. Fassin gives you another example. He says, when he's speaking about the pre-pandemic era, he says, asylum seekers in Europe may gain more rights to legal asylum by procuring a formal medical document that certifies their status as unable to return to their country of origin owing to the fact that they have been diagnosed by a life-threatening illness, or they can show bodily scars to have been persecuted or tortured in their own country. So this is, I think, the opposite which is happening here, where you have to download an app if you want to travel by air, produce a medical document if you want to cross over a border, and the borders which exist within the country, not outside it also. So, and the modern liberal individuals are individuals who cannot appear to be enterprising nor politically embedded so long as their biology is taken for legibility instead of their words. So you, like the body becomes put under the scanner, scanned for various diseases, scanned for your illnesses, and that gains you legitimacy, whether or not you have or possess certain viruses or illnesses or diseases. So Fassin strikes his project out as returning to Foucault's work on life and biopower prior to his turn towards technologies of governance, and offers two terms for us to work with. One is bio-inequality and the other is bio-legitimacy. And once we see how humanitarianism has become a generalized mode of governing, he argues, we can further see how such a thing as bio-legitimacy operates today as the power of life, as opposed to the biopolitical power of life. So there is a distinction he is making here from biopolitics to bio-legitimacy. So he says, thus, we emphasize the construction of the meaning and values of life and reframes the tenets of biopolitics or biopower that to make live becomes a matter of choice over who shall live, what sort of life, and for how long. So the value-laden way then further allows us to begin conceptualizing inequality. But this idea has to come in. And another brilliant example that Fassin has given us is, Esposito has given us regarding biolegitimacy is the Afghanistan war in 2001. That is after 9/11, he says, a new kind of humanitarianism. Now, this is another word which has been problematized both by Fassin as well as by Esposito. And this example will make that, it's a brilliant example which will make very clear what many people think humanitarianism is. So he says, after 9/11, a new kind of humanitarianism takes place over the skies of Afghanistan. Bombs as well as food and medical supplies are dropped from the same sky. So there you have it, the idea of humanitarianism. So before I wind up, again, this is an example which I constantly go to. So if you have heard it before, excuse me. But I would like to stop the um, turbulent issues that are being raised in contemporary times with an address to another book written by Anna Tizing, and it is called The Mushroom at the End of the World. And she talks about the Masutake mushrooms. So it is supposed, we know about the mushroom cloud that loomed in the period of the Second World War in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the belief is that after the disaster, the first things to grow were the Masutake mushrooms. So in Japan, it is considered to be a very important commodity for gift giving, and it's very expensive as well. And Anna Tsing sort of traces the growth of these mushrooms in forests where people have actually invaded the forest, but still the mushroom, a precarious existence, continues to flourish there. And she talks about how these people, the foragers in the forest, who have been sort of pushed out of any network of labor organizations or any sort of protection by the government, they come together and they gather these mushrooms, and this becomes part of an export chain. And finally, the mushrooms end up in Japan, where they are consumed with great interest and relish. And she traces this as an effort to survive in the face of ruthless capitalism, where certain bodies are discarded as unimportant. And what she's trying to make clear through the icon of the, or the metaphor of the Masutake mushroom, is the fact that the precariats will survive. And this is what I would like to end on, the note of survival and the note that we will overcome the turbulent times, that we somehow will manage to find a niche in which we can protect ourselves and the rest of the world. Perhaps a very sort of utopian thinking, but perhaps that is what is going to save us in the end. In the meantime, how we address the classes becomes another crucial issue. And we hear of people who talk about how the online teaching can never replace the brick and mortar classrooms. It can never replace in that sense. But what do we do within a crisis? I think in Kerala, we've never ever experienced the trauma of a war. We've never experienced the a first-hand experience of trauma of partition or any such thing. I think it's the first time that we are encountering such a problem. And I think that we need to think on our feet, we need to evolve, and we need to prioritize the students and to find out how best they can be addressed. And one thing which I'm sure will emerge out of this is that we will have people who will ponder on this, think about this, and come up with solutions, because each one of us will have to find a solution which is peculiarly suited to our demography, which will be peculiarly suited to our target audience. So I think I'm coming to the end of the time allotted to me. Thank you very much for your patient listening. And I'm not very good at technology. Let's see if I have any questions. Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
So Amrita or Nivedita, please take the questions.
Yes, sir. Ma'am?
Yeah.
One question has come.
Ma'am, shall I read out the question?
I think the question is, yeah, read it out, please, Nivedita.
Ma'am, your question is from Vidya Karingat. Can we say the present medico-judicial system acted as an oppressive power to suppress the underprivileged?
What do you mean by the medico-judicial system? Well, I think, when the medico-judicial system addresses a particular society, it sort of does it pan-culturally, or in a very, it doesn't look at the nuances of the society. So perhaps the underprivileged were further suppressed. It is very true. The question is, what was an alternative? And when we are dealing with a crisis, everybody will suffer, not just the underprivileged, everybody will suffer. But the problem is, as it is the underprivileged is suffering greatly, their suffering increases. So once we enter the situation, the next point is to try to find out how best we can alleviate the distress. I think that is the way which we can answer this, because I don't think there was another way other than in a country like India, where we could exist without social distancing in the wake of the pandemic.
Ma'am, next question is from Divya Krishnan.
Mm.
How do you look at demands of human rights to counter lockdown and social distancing mediated by the powerful center? Or is there a center anymore?
Why don't we ask ourselves this question? How many of us, with the knowledge, the medical knowledge that we have been given, are willing to give up social distancing? How many of us are willing to give up social distancing as a resistance to a power structure which has asked us to social distance ourselves? That is a question which I would like to raise. Will any of us do that? That's why I spoke about resistant movements in the public domain. How far will such resistant movements be allowed to, or will there be people who are willing to come to the public domain, gather in hordes to protest against anything? At least during these times, I do not know what will happen in future, but in these times, I don't know whether, like I said, the surveillance is something in which we are all complicit in. We do not want not to be looked at. We want to be looked at. Most of us do. We want the state to look at us, to look at our neighbors, to people who are traveling in and traveling out. It is a matter of safety, we feel, and that feeling is what makes us obey or comply with the norms.
Ma'am, next question is from Ganesh Mankulam. As
Yeah.
always, with all biopolitical machineries of management of life, here also, this management of...
No. He starts before that. He says, one second, he says, I disagree with the statement, there was no normal. We always had normal. My question is this idea of normal and abnormal. If you have a normal, you have an abnormal. So what was normal? If you look at it from the women's point of view, patriarchy was not normal. If you look at it from multiple genders' point of view, masculinity was not normal. So I fail to understand that we have one regular or one common denominator called normal at all. We have multiple normals, you could say, depending on your perspective. That is all that I was trying to make here. Yes, continue, Nivedita.
Ma'am, next question from Neetu Baby.
Yeah.
How can biolegitimacy transcend geography when diseases are determined by biological habitat?
How can biolegitimacy transcend geography? Well, that is what I was trying to tell you. Your body gains legitimacy with the production of a particular certificate, or like Fazeen has spoken about, you show certain scars to show that you were attacked in your country, and thereby you get it. So this works in two ways. In one way, you gain access because of the biological problems, and sometimes you are denied access because of certain other varieties of medical issues.
Ma'am, next question is from Manoj. How can we make sure the students' right to learn during and after the COVID-19 through online teaching?
Let us just deal with during the COVID-19. How would you deal with online? And again, I do not have one single answer. I think this is something which requires grassroots intervention, where you have a teacher who knows his or her students and their demography. All right. And when we attack online teaching, or when we say it won't work, I agree with you. Online teaching perhaps may not work for many students who are out of the digital networking, infrastructure. So what do we do with them? As a teacher, personally, what I would do is I would identify the students who did not have access and personally reach out to them and make sure that they somehow manage to listen to what the teacher said. Perhaps not in live online classes. Perhaps they could be given a CD of the recordings. Perhaps they could be sent printouts of the teaching material that we have prepared. But I don't think a student should be made to suffer because of the pandemic which is raging outside. What will happen is that the digital divide will get even more wider, because there will be students who can afford online and there will be students who cannot. So as a teacher, we have to address this peculiar issue. Yes.
Ma'am, next question is from Harita Chalan. Ma'am, do you think if the pandemic continues, would we be forced to go back to our rural areas and be self-relevant since cities spread diseases easily?
Self-reliance, and how many of us do have rural areas to go back to? I do not have a rural place to go back to. I'm stuck in a flat. So it is not everybody
Yeah,
who has the, what do I say, luxury of going back to a rural community. And perhaps we realize the importance of food now, because farming is what is going to sustain us if this goes on extensively and intensely as it is appearing to now.
Ma'am,
Yes.
next question is from Sergeant Sir. What about morality and biolegitimacy, especially religious morality?
I'm sorry, I don't understand, sir. Uh, Religious morality and biolegitimacy. These are religion. Again, I do not know what to say about religion in these times. Religion is rather abstract, isn't it? Like democracy itself. And how do you relate biolegitimacy with religion? I was talking about governmentality and the idea of the body as a site for pathogens, medical problems. I'm not sure how I get religion into the framework. I don't know. Or do you mean to say that religion gives biolegitimacies to certain bodies instead of others? Yeah, perhaps. Will religion become irrelevant? I think after the wars, did religion become irrelevant? No, it didn't. And I don't have that much positive faith in humanity to think that we will emerge as very positive citizens who have inclusive thinking and all that. We will just wait for this to get over with, and I'm sure that what we call normal will be resumed. Personally, now, Zizek, I know, has said that capitalism will come to an end, perhaps, but we're not sure again, because if you look at chaotic theory and all that, any chaotic system has a way of reinventing itself at the moment when it is going to completely crash. Is that it?
Yes, ma'am. I think so.
Thank you then. Thank you for your patient listening. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for answering the questions, ma'am. And it reminded me of your MPhil lectures, ma'am. Anderson
Thank you,
and Agamben
Nivedita.
and Foucault and all. Thank you, ma'am. Now, I invite Aishwarya PK, Assistant Professor of our department, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Nivedita, can you listen to me?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes,
Aishwarya.
yes, ma'am.
Proceed.
Hi all. With this session, we are winding up the two-day international webinar organized by the PG Department of English, Payyanur College, Payyanur. And I'm very happy that we got a well-acclaimed to handle this session. Thank you, ma'am, and we love the way you handled the session and encouraged us to understand the biopolitics within a new pandemic. Thank you, ma'am, for opening up new vistas of knowledge within us. Thank you once again. And since we are coming to the end of the webinar, I thank everyone who cooperated with us for the smooth conduct of the webinar, including our resource hosts, Dr. Ajay Kumar, Dr. Roy P. Whittle, Dr. Christine A. D. Leon, Dr. Jennifer Abad, and Dr. C.S. Biju. I also thank Dr. Somachandran Keeler, first, ICSC coordinator, Dr. Sundar, syndicate member, Vishal, webinar coordinator, A.C. Srihari, Dr. A.C. Srihari, joint coordinator, Dr. Shaima, Ms. Amrita Vaidu, who introduced to the person, and Ms. Nivedita Ake, who compared the session, and all other faculty of the PG Department of English. Once again, I thank all participants for their wonderful preparation. Thank you all.
Now, over to Dr. V.M. Santosh.
Okay, I hope I am audible.
Yes, sir, you are.
So thank you everybody for supporting us. I have to make a few announcements before we wind up. It's about the attendance and certificates. We are getting many queries because we know this API and net visit and all these things are very important. We understand that. And now in the chat box, the attendance link is posted. That is to join the WhatsApp group. If you have already joined that WhatsApp group yesterday, Okay, that is. And those people who joined yesterday, I think somebody has been muted. Please mute your mic. Some disturbances. Who, all of you, please mute yourself. So those people who joined today, they can click that link and their attendance will be marked. And as already informed to all participants, it will take 7 to 10 days time for us to generate this certificate, and all of you will receive the certificate anyway through your email. And, there are some different cases because we were here for most of the time and later had to leave by the time this link is there. We will be taking up such cases because there is no bureaucratic red tapeism here. All of us are part of an academic community with integrity. So don't worry if you have listened to the lecture, you will get the certificates. Then about this seminar, some disturbances may request if anybody has not muted the microphone, please do it. I request. I can check it from here. And about this experience, as already said, this is a novel experience for the Department of English also. And as mentioned yesterday, we have made another novel attempt. We have started a YouTube channel and posted the video. You can see that. And the entire program has been aired on YouTube Live also. And this was the second experience. We were totally novice to this kind of an experience. And anyway, we are enthused by the support and participation and the encouragement that we have received from every one of you. We got responses from different countries like Kuwait, Maldives, Philippines, and the Middle East. Then from more than 10 Indian states, we got participants here. About 230 joined that WhatsApp group, and the attendance was around 200. And we are very happy that it's not merely registering for the purpose of registration. The lowest number was I think 170 when the seminar was going on. So that's a great indication that people are very much interested in this kind of interaction. They are attending not for the sake of certificates alone. So we are really enthused and encouraged by your support, and we are even planning to continue with this kind of an interaction with the academic community. The department will sit together, the faculty will sit together, and we have very crude plans at present of having at least one lecture online like this, so that we can listen to very resourceful academicians like Priya ma'am, Biju, and Ajay Kumar sir, and all those, even international faculty. So that plan is on the anvil. We will be getting back to you. And about the certificates, which is the last part of this business, the certificates will reach you in a week's time. We will try to make it as early as possible because we also have to finish this business and move to other duties. And please, you need not put any queries or reminders regarding the certificate. It's our responsibility to see that the support that you have given us is reciprocated in a decent manner. So thank you very much for your interaction, and I hope today we could proceed without any technical lag or technical glitches. So thank you very much. And Srihari sir, a coordinator, your winding comments, please.
Thank you, Dr. V.M. Santosh, for technically coordinating all the sessions. I'll be thanking you and our principal, Dr. K. Prabindran Kiroth, and all other teachers. Here I would like to express my thanks to Dr. P.P. Ajay Kumar, Mr. Roy and his team, and Dr. C.S. Biju, and Dr. Priya K. Nair, and all the participants, including the students and other staff members of Payyanur College, who came up with questions, who made our interaction sessions lively. I thank you once again, all of you. Santosh, let us wind up.
Okay. So we can wind up. This is as mentioned yesterday. The host cannot disperse the group, so we can disperse ourselves individually. So thank you very much. We'll see again maybe shortly. we'll intimate. Thank you.